Hello, BookTube, and welcome to day 21 of Vlogmas. Today we're going to try a journey into the unknown. We're going to try a little learning experience together, because I've mentioned on this channel that I've come to feel a little bad about how harsh we've all been with contemporary poetry. Granted, a lot of it looks like errant, fly-blown garbage, but in 2019, I think we should learn to read it and maybe appreciate it. And those baby steps can start now. So for Vlogmas Day 21, I thought we would read a contemporary poem together and see what we make of it. It's in the latest issue of The New Yorker. There is Bob Mueller and Donald Trump. And this is, there are two poems in this issue, apart from Ian Fraser's typical holiday poem. Every year he does a poem at the holidays, looking back in jingly stuff on the events of the year. It's execrable, so I ignore it. But every issue of the New Yorker usually has two poems. This one doesn't appear to. There is one other thing set off by Anne Carson, but it's a block of prose, so it's not a poem. And we're going to need to figure out what to do about that in 2019. If I'm going to understand contemporary poetry, I'm going to come anywhere close to appreciating it, then there are going to have to be rules. You can't say that, for instance, as I have seen young people say, you cannot say that a blank page with your name at the bottom is a poem. I've had people hand me such things and say, this is my latest work. And you also can't say that a block of prose is a poem. Because poetry is circumscribed by its orthography. It's circumscribed by its form. The form has many variations, but you can't say anything is a poem, and prose obviously is not. So that other thing in this issue, the thing that's blocked off as just a block of prose, just a meditation in sentences by Anne Carson, is not a poem. And we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that in 2019, because I am not biddable. I am not some wishy-washy, ginger-bearded ally, or however you want to call it. I am not willing to have someone come to me, whether that someone is young or old and established or a cult figure, and say, reality is what I say it is. No. No. I have been reading and studying literature for a very, very, very long time, and I am perfectly adaptable to all kinds of new things. But you don't get to call blue orange. Okay? So if you write a block of prose, you have written a block of prose. You have not written a poem. and we'll have to deal with a few other things too, like open incomprehensibility. If you write 50 random words, and when asked in an interview say, yeah, I chose them at random so that no one could understand the poem, then it's junk. The purpose of art is to be understood. The purpose of art is to communicate. So if you openly say, I did this in order to baffle inquiry, then you're a junk artist, you're a con artist, and I'm not going to call what you do good just because I don't understand it. But we can figure out all the ground rules later. In fact, it might be fun figuring out the ground rules together, because I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who finds much contemporary poetry not only incomprehensible, but smug. And that's not good. So anyway, so we're going to pick the other poem. So it brings us out to one poem. If we leave out the Christmas doggerel and we leave out the prose, then we have one poem, which is by James Longenbach, who I looked him up. He's an academic at the University of Rochester. He's been there for a long time. He's written a few volumes of poetry and one volume of critical ruminations on poetry. And he has a poem in the latest issue of The New Yorker, good for him, very good, called 112th Street. And it goes like this. If ever you have a chance, you should climb a volcano. The hermitage at the base camp, the glass of brandy, that's the past. Who wants to think about the past? You want to push forward, climb higher, while all around you, inches beneath your feet, earth is seething, a river of liquid rock. Will you make it to the summit? The flying slag, the potholes, red as an open wound? Of course you will. It's easy. Everybody does. So little behind you, so much ahead. Once, walking up Broadway late at night, both of us a little drunk, flurries in the air, Christmas trees lining the sidewalk, block after block. At every corner, you kissed me. Then the light would change. Okay, so that's 112th Street. And it looks to me, on the surface here, like the poet is trying to describe two things and compare them to each other. The sensation of being mildly drunk and walking up the street past a string of red lights in the heart of New York City while being in love and periodically kissing, and the experience of walking up the slope of an active volcano. There are some problems. There are a couple of lines in here that I think are just put in here without any thought at all. Like, for instance, who wants to think about the past? Unless I'm misunderstanding it. Unless that is meant to be a self-aware callback to the fact that the whole poem is the poet thinking about the past. But if so, why the comparison with a volcano? And why that bit about will you make it... let's see here. You want to push forward, climb higher, while all around you, inches beneath your feet, earth is seething, a river of liquid rock. Of course, factually, just directionally, that doesn't make sense. The earth underneath your feet, we're told, is seething, a river of molten rock. That is not all around you. That is beneath your feet. That is not anywhere else but beneath your feet. and also, will you make it to the summit? The flying slag, the potholes red as an open wound? Of course you will. It's easy. Everybody does. But if a volcano is at the point where slag is flying, then no one is climbing it. Red potholes, yes, and that's rather nice. Red as an open wound. That's rather nice. That, yes. But if no one climbs an actively erupting volcano, and I don't know if that's also meant to be a call out to the memory here, the memory of the sort of the molten nature of being in love and slightly drunk in New York City, or if it's just that the author doesn't have any idea what a volcano is, hasn't bothered to align what he's writing with reality in any way. I don't know. I like the second part of the poem where the poet is remembering being in love on 112th Street. I like that, but it's very brief. Most of the poem, the emphasis of the poem seems to be about volcanoes, even though it's called 112th Street. So, I don't know. To me, it is not memorable, and mainly because to me it seems muddled, and I'm wondering what you thought. If I don't know, would I get in trouble with James Longenbach or the New Yorker if I were to write the text of this poem down below this video? I don't know how that would work one way or another. Maybe it's linkable, but I expect that most of the New Yorker is behind a paywall, considering that every print issue is $10. But one way or another, you heard me recite it, and I'm wondering what you think, because we're going to have to lean on each other if we're going to learn about contemporary poetry in 2019. It can't be all me. And it also can't be the experts, because the experts of contemporary poetry have rigged a con game for 50 years at least, that they're going to stick with. And that the tent pole, the number one basic thing in that con game is that poetry is anything they say it is, and that everything they declare to be good is good whether you can spot the good or not. It's the equivalent con game to contemporary art, where a painter will walk up to a blank canvas with a bucket of red paint. He will swing the bucket back, swing it forward, and the whole contents of the bucket will fly onto the canvas. And then he's done. and the modern art world will not only call that art, when it manifestly is not. Art is a product of skill, not random chance. They'll not only call it art when it manifestly is not, but they'll sell it as modern art for a vast amount of money, and more money than every generation of my family has ever seen, going back to the Norman Conquest. So there's quite a marked amount of obscene blind leading the blind here, and that can't fly. I'm not going to say modern art. I'm not going to say modern music or anything like that. But modern poetry is a literary genre. And everything that's not modern poetry, I not only know, but love. So if I'm going to essay modern poetry in 2019, we have to have some rules. and we'll just figure out what those are. Like, for instance, in the poem that I read here, 112th Street, did you detect formal skill? Did you detect a form? Period? I'd love to know. I'll see what I can do about putting these in the video. I'm not really sure that I can do that. I haven't thought about that because it's all, the author's work. We'll see if I Google it and it's readily available on his website, for instance, then I'm assuming he doesn't mind. But one way or another, we'll figure out a way. So that's Vlogmas for day 21. A little baby step towards figuring out contemporary poetry instead of just skipping it in every literary journal that we all read. Instead of skipping it under the rather depressing but somewhat accurate assumption that most of us have, which is that you're not going to get it if you read it. Well, that's not right. It's a whole literary form, and it has a longer history than any other literary form. It's wrong for us to give it up just because it's been hijacked by a bunch of con artists trying to make a block of prose into a poem. Anne Carson doesn't get to sit at a table and say, well, here's my latest poem, and hand me a piece of paper with a paragraph of prose. And then when I say to her, well, okay, this isn't a poem, say, yes, it is. No, you don't get to do that any more than you get to say that a rhino is a Jeep. But anyway, I didn't mean to turn this into a tirade. I'm actually open-minded on this subject. It's just, I'm open-minded on the subject in 2019 of figuring out a way to enjoy some contemporary poetry. But that does not mean that I'm letting go of my critical faculties. That contemporary poetry has counted on that. And that can't fly. So that will, no doubt, very drastically limit the number of contemporary poets that I'm actually reading closely. But we shall see. In any case, I'm going to stop before I keep ranting. So that was a poem for your day. I'll see you soon, Book 2.